If you're active in the One Piece community, you've definitely heard people discussing the possibility of Davy Jones and Joy Boy being the same person. But while this has become a fairly popular idea, I've yet to see a single person substantiate the theory thematically. The only solid argument I've seen comes from people questioning why Rocks chose the name Davy Jones when he clearly wanted to piss Emu off, as surely just saying Joy Boy would suffice, with him being Emu's greatest enemy. But if they were the same person, it would piss Emu off and be a showcase of the extent of Rocks' knowledge. I love this theory. I'm not crazy attached to it or anything, but I think it has great potential to be true, and I would prefer it significantly more than Davy Jones being a brand new character from the Void Century who served as a rival or enemy of Joy Boy in the same vein as Rocks did for Roger and Blackbeard will for Luffy. Allow me to explain. One Piece is a story about stories. Generational cycles, wills inherited from the dead by the living, dreams carried across the ages. One Piece is also a story about mystery and interpretation as it pertains to these stories, these myths of man. There's an element of fiction within the narrative itself, within the lore, and how the world responds to different events. Oden's backstory is presented like folklore. Luffy is mythologized in the eyes of the public as we saw in Dressrosa because the masses who hear of such unbelievable stories try to rationalize them and come up with suitable explanations. Yamato exists as this sort of audience insert, a character enamored by the parallels between Luffy and Roger just as we are. There are countless examples of this. The world of One Piece is a massive one, filled with a ridiculous variety of characters whose stories take place on the grandest stage. The sea that encompasses the bulk of the planet, the sea ruled over by the world government, who are notorious scriptwriters. They define the status quo, they control the narrative, and this is the same world government that was established 800 years ago, shortly following the ultimate story of One Piece. The story of the One Piece itself, the namesake of the series we're reading, the story that made Roger laugh. The story of Joy Boy and the Void Century, a story that would have been erased from history entirely if not for its preservation as inscriptions upon the ancient rocks, the poneglyphs, in a secret language nobody except Robin can read. Speaking of Robin, one of the most integral facets of the character is the duality between a pure-hearted, kind soul with the reputation of a demon, a reputation thrust upon her by the world government who painted a narrative about her in order to kill her because of the threat her knowledge posed to the ultimate narrative of the world. This metafictional stories about stories aspect of One Piece is absolutely everywhere, and if this was a more serious video, I'd probably be spending 10 times the effort and time to truly display just how deep this goes. The Void Century is a time wiped away from people's minds, removed from the historical record, the true history our main protagonists must discover and come up with an answer for. For now though, it's a fantasy within the story of One Piece, a time mythologized and almost impossible to access and verify. And so to bring it back to the theory, it makes a lot of sense to me if the main character of that ultimate story, Joy Boy himself, is a man subject to varying interpretations. Some think of him as a liberator, others think of him as a destroyer, some think of him as a god, others think of him as a devil. Some think of him as the boy who brings joy, others think of him as Davy Jones. We know thanks to Vegapunk that Joy Boy was the first pirate. The Davy backfight originated on Hachinosu, also known as Pirate Island. It's a pretty logical through line for the first pirate to create the most legendary pirate game that builds pirate crews on the pirate island. The island probably got its name because of it. If he created the concept of piracy, pioneered that way of life, then the one iconic pirate game created on the island named after pirates being tied back to him would make a great deal of sense. And bringing it back to the earlier point, Rocks was most likely in the Flower Room specifically to confirm the existence of Emu. We know thanks to the SBS and even just his general behavior within the story that Blackbeard is interested in archaeology and history. His iconic introduction is literally him boldly proclaiming that the Sky Island, which is yet another example of things being fictionalized within the story itself, does in fact exist. It's not just a fantasy, it's reality. This interest in history is a trait probably passed down from his father in some way, and so why would Rocks choose Davy Jones if he wanted to piss Emu off? Why not Joy Boy if he knows enough about history to know that Emu exists and went to the Flower Room to verify their existence? Surely he knows about Joy Boy too. because they might just be the same person. Rox's Jolly Roger bears a slight visual resemblance to Nika's appearance. Within Elbaf, we've been introduced to an important duality in the interpretations of Nika. As a figure who appeared whenever the world was approaching a great reset, there are just as many people who view him as the source of that destruction as there are people who view him as the warrior of liberation. It sort of reminds me of the iconic cherry pie scene. The way we are introduced to Blackbeard is with him having the exact opposite reactions to Luffy in the bar, establishing a dynamic of juxtaposition. What if they are both viable Nika candidates and their dynamic will be a battle to declare who is more suitable? Luffy is the sun god. The Battle of Banaro Island was a prelude of things to come on several levels. It wasn't just the trigger for the Summit War, but a taste of the battle that will come at the end of the series at the summit of the world. The real sun versus darkness. The real inheritor of Roger's will versus Blackbeard, who inherits the will of Zebek. The liberator versus destroyer dichotomy established in Elbaf even ties into the nature of their powers. Luffy's devil fruit is the embodiment of absolute freedom. He can literally do anything with his body. The kid has cartoon powers. And both of Blackbeard's devil fruits, the Yami Yami and the Gura Gura, are forces of destruction. The darkness fruit is one of gravity, its main technique being the black hole, which swallows up everything in the vicinity and crushes it up, as Blackbeard demonstrates handily by performing it on the entire village in Banaro Island. But the interesting thing comes after. The technique Blackbeard uses to expel all of the destroyed remains of the black hole is very aptly named Liberation, a term that would go on to become inseparably tied to Luffy and Nika. Craftsdwarf made an incredible video on the thematic dynamic between Luffy and Blackbeard that covers this. I'll leave the link in the description, but watching it after 1155 further strengthened this theory for me. Luffy and Blackbeard have both been liberators over the course of the story, with key points of contrast separating the two. They both freed Drum Island from a tyrannical ruler. They both freed prisoners of Impel Down. And so what if they are both supposedly inheritors of Joy Boy's will, coming to vastly different interpretations of the main character of One Piece's ultimate story, Lost to Time and Emu, with Luffy coming out on top because he doesn't even know who Joy Boy is and could care less. He does everything he does because that's who Luffy is. Disclaimer, I'll be discussing some Attack on Titan spoilers for the next 30 seconds or so. If you haven't seen it, it's 2025, do yourself a favor and go read the damn story. Okay, if you're still here, take a look at this panel. This is what I envision for the myth of Joy Boy in the lore of One Piece. To the Malian Empire, Ymir was a pawn of the devil. To the Eldian Empire, Ymir was a god-given miracle. This historical figure whose true history had been lost to time became mythologized, with the people coming to various conflicting interpretations on her existence. One Piece is a story of manifestation. I've made a short video in the past discussing the law of attraction and how it applies to One Piece. Why this spread is my favorite in the entire manga, because it outlines a principle so incredibly central to the overarching narrative. Anything man can imagine is a possibility in reality, is a literal mechanic in the story if Vegapunk's theory on the nature of devil fruits is correct. And that statement is incredibly similar to Kruger's words in Attack on Titan. Anyone can become a god or a devil, all it takes is for someone to claim it to be true. Your beliefs dictate your reality, and this applies to this theory so wonderfully, because if Joy Boy and Davy Jones are the same person, then Roger and Rox must have wildly conflicting interpretations of the figure. And as the bearers of the wills inherited by Luffy and Blackbeard respectively, their interpretations will dictate the ultimate battle of piracy, of liberation and destruction. The battle between Luffy and Blackbeard will be a battle between the two who will finish what Roger and Rox started, embodying their different interpretations of Joy Boy respectively, to decide which one will come out on top. This dichotomy even harkens back to the pilot chapter of the series, the original Romance Dawn, and its distinction between pirates as either peacemains or Morganeers, two wildly different approaches to freedom. Peacemains are whimsical adventure seekers who mean no harm, and Morganeers are plunderers who kill and steal without a care for innocent life, with the two pirates of the worst generation most emblematic of these concepts being Luffy and Blackbeard respectively. Joy Boy was the first pirate. There's many ways to interpret this, but I believe it simply means he was the first person who chose to live as an outlaw and fly his own banner. He had foregone any allegiances but his own, seeking freedom on the seas. Since he made Roger laugh, since Zunisha thinks of him as Nika and the warrior of liberation, since Emmett is a cutie pie who idolizes him, it's clear that Joy Boy was the kind of pirate that 17-year-old Eiichiro Oda would have referred to as a peacemain. yet choosing to set yourself apart from society, choosing to give up any rights you may have had, and essentially create your own law of governance as a pirate with your own crew, is not something all the people of Joy Boy's time would have taken well. It's very likely he was slandered in the eyes of the public, the same way we see narratives painted about Luffy by the world government. And so came the birth of the Morganeer as the result of Joy Boy's infamy, as a reputation rather than a reality, a reputation that many would take to heart and embody in their own journeys of piracy. Joy Boy is a name given by the slaves he liberated, by the people he made laugh and brought happiness to. Perhaps Davy Jones is simply his real name, one that the people of the time vilified and misrepresented for his bold act of pioneering piracy, meaning both of these kinds of pirates, the Peacemains and Morganeers, came from the same individual, the first pirate Joy Boy, also known as Davy Jones, a legacy wiped away by the world government that managed to persist for 800 years, now embodied by the ultimate Peacemain and the ultimate Morganeer, Luffy and Blackbeard respectively, the two warriors of liberation. And with that, we have reached the end of the theory. But wait, before you go and comment this, I am well aware that much of my argumentation can be used to support the idea that Davy Jones was just a separate figure, his own man who had a rivalry with Joy Boy, as I mentioned at the start of the video. That's definitely possible, and knowing Oda, probably the more likely option. I like this theory because even if it's not true and Davy Jones is just a brand new character we'll meet in the future, most of the analysis still holds up and applies to Luffy and Blackbeard. I just personally think Davy being the Blackbeard / Zebek of the Void Century is kinda predictable and boring, which isn't a terrible thing by any means, but I would thoroughly enjoy this theory as a sort of curveball that is not only thematically consistent, but would add new dimensions to the commentary and One Piece as a story about stories. Please leave your thoughts and theories in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.